It'll be on KKFI a week from Thursday. Yeah, the water down here. You need some. Go ahead and use.
We have a small office now.
What's that?
We have an office in our church now.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
It's not that big, but it's still space. It's something really
All right.
making progress, you know. There's a lot of stuff we're involved in. This is, you know.
I know. In fact, I'll probably ask a question myself about how you're monitoring it with your PM 2.5. What do they call them? There's a name, a brand name for those.
Is it low cost sensors?
Yeah. Right. Good morning. My name's, is it on? Okay. My name is Craig Volland. I'm a member of the Forum Committee. Welcome to All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church Forum. The Forum's mission is to afford a platform for the discussion of significant issues, especially those that involve ethical values in the contemporary world, and to promote critical thinking. We've been doing this since 1943. First thing, order of business is for you to silence your uh, cell phones, which I forgot to do. That's because this program will be repeated on KKFI a week from Thursday, and it's also being recorded for YouTube, and we have listeners that are virtual at this moment. This morning, we have really an interesting program. Um, our speakers are Atenas, Mena, and Beto Martinez of CleanAirNow. They're co-directors. I've been acquainted with them for a long time. In fact, Beto moved here 3 or 4 years ago from LA, where he was a leader in the work trying to protect people living near all those ports where they bring in all the products from Asia. And there's all that diesel emissions there. So he's had many, many years of experience in this issue. And so I'll hand it over to them.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us, and thank you so much for the introduction. We really appreciate having this opportunity to share about the work that we're doing and the fight that is ongoing. Like he mentioned, my name is Atenas Mena, and I'm the co-executive director and environmental health director of Clean Air Now. I was actually born and raised in Kansas City, Kansas. The places where you'll learn that we have like our air monitors installed, and we're trying to determine like what the air pollution looks like, which we know is like higher contamination in areas where there's people of color and low income. That's the same neighborhood that I grew up in. And I'm just excited to be here. Just a little bit of more background is I went into nursing and have worked at a pediatric hospital that's in this area. And honestly, my passion just started driving more into like, how can we prevent health problems from happening? How can we prevent kids from having to go to the hospital, have asthma attacks? And that's why I was really drawn to Clean Air Now and the work that is being done. I know that before healthcare was in the homes, was in the neighborhoods. And I still consider myself a nurse. I still consider that this is the way that we can really help move and make that upstream change. But I'll also let Beto talk a little bit more about himself.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, hi, good morning. My name is Beto Martinez. I'm the co-executive director of Cleaner Now, and been involved with the Cleaner Now even before I moved here. So I was in some capacity involved with them for I think over 10 years already since it started. It was really a small grassroots organization that started in the neighborhoods of Armourdale, and the neighborhoods of Armourdale, Argentine, and Turner, because community members were concerned about the environmental health hazards, the impacts that pollution had on their health. Very concerned around that. So a young woman, Leticia, a friend of ours as well, started organizing her community around these issues. And early on, the organization knew that there was much more that needed to be done in the area around air pollution, and not just air pollution, but also water pollution and soil pollution, because these same communities where the organization started um, are have is known to have a legacy contamination, which is from industrial facilities that in the past probably produced lead, silver. They had the silver smelter, which uses a lot of lead. So we know that's still in the soil. They have been they found that there. So that's a little bit about the organization, how it started. We'll get more into that in a bit. But a little bit about me. So like Craig mentioned, I did move from California here. I've been involved in environmental justice organizing for over a decade, but very involved in it either way before that, but not in a role as being involved as at the forefront of this fight. Because early on, as a young kid, I also grew up right across the street from a petrochemical facility that formulated agrochemicals, spraying, even though some of them were banned, we know that in some of these communities, the farmers, agricultural um, companies continue to store chemicals such as DDT and continue to spray even 10, even 15, 20 years after it was banned. And so all these impacts really drive the work that I do, all these known experiences of living through a USDA HUD program housing that puts communities of color or people of color in harm's way. It's also very intentional. Kind of, I understood that later, right? I didn't understand it when I was growing up, but once I got out of high school and breathing all this stuff day in day out, and then later something's wrong in my community, and I started making the connection. That's why I'm so involved. That's why I'm involved in this organizing at first around environmental justice. So a little bit about me. Thanks.
And we only left up this slide. Usually, when we do presentations, we like to set some ground rules because we are tackling some very difficult conversations for everyone to really embark on. And we just want to have that reminder of like remaining being respectful to one another, understanding that we may feel vulnerable at times. And then anytime when we've worked with other organizations or people, we always talk with them ahead of time to, if it's going to be recorded, it's something that's decided between the two parties because, and in this case, it's being recorded because we agreed to having this being recorded. But other times we've experienced extractive partners where they record without our permission, they take information that we say, or they use some of our data against us. So we just want to make sure that this is why we put this up here, just to set that setting. So Beto was starting to go into it, but Clean Air Now is a community-led organization that creates systemic change in existing policies and practices to protect health and dismantle environmental racism that perpetuates the unequal distribution of environmental hazards in fence-line communities. So I know this can feel like a mouthful, but this is the type of work that we do, and we're going to dive more into what it means to be fence line, what it means to have environmental racism, and what are the health differences, right? That some communities experience health hazards compared to others. So, environmental racism, to really put it simple, is that race is the most significant predictor of a person living near contaminated air, water, or soil. And across America, there are many different types of chemical facilities with nearly 200 million Americans living nearby them and 56,000 schools that are in immediate or serious danger in the event of a leak, spill, or explosion. But what makes it inequitable is that people of color and low income communities are the ones that are usually living closer to these facilities. They're the ones that are next to the coal plants. They're the ones that have the landfills, the toxic release inventory sites. So this is happening nationwide, but we definitely want to dive into what does that look like in the Kansas City area, because we are no strangers to some of this divide and inequity. So this is data and research that was published by that is still unpublished by Dr. Friedman. She's a local pediatrician, medical doctor, and she's a great ally of CleanAirNow. But I just wanted to highlight some of the important information that she was able to gather. On the right, you will see a map that shows colors in red, orange, purple, and blue. So, you may be familiar with the terms of redlining. Kansas City has a long history of systemic racism, and this is what it looked like. And to be honest, redlining is still occurring to this day. But if you're not familiar, redlining is basically in the 1940s, the Homeowner Corporation developed maps to help banks decide where to invest. They systematically highlighted racial and ethnic communities and gave them low grades, which basically discouraged banks and investors in the communities. This practice is what we call redlining. Dr. Friedman's research shows that toxic release inventory sites, so all those black dots that you see on the map, are closer to the areas that are considered the redlining zones. And they were also on here in this chart over here. D is showing the redlining areas and the average distance to the TRI sites. So as you can see, based off of what category you fell under, whether you were red or considered more investable or more white, more predominant, then you were further away from those toxic release inventory sites. Yes, TRI is the toxic release inventory site. So that just means these are facilities that release toxic hazards and causing more air pollution in the area. And toxic release inventory sites are also associated, if you're being exposed to it regularly, to cancer or other health problems. Yep. So the color coding was done. The red areas were the areas that investors and bank owners said that this is an area that is not worth investing in. This is the area where there was predominantly black and brown communities. This is the area where there's a lot of low income communities. So those that's from the map that was created back in the like 1940s. And in the when you think of like Kansas City, Missouri, for example, we know like east of Truman or Paseo, that's where predominantly we see the black and brown communities, the low income communities. That's where we have seen a highway cut through neighborhoods, right? And cause this divide. And then there's such a difference between that neighborhood and the plaza. So I still try to like remind people that this divide, although it happened decades ago, is still being seen and perpetuated to this day. Is that helpful?
Yeah, so before I get into this slide, I want to talk a little bit about, I don't know, do you have a slide on fence line communities, what it means? We can do it now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about earlier Atenas mentioned or intro of the fence line community. So a fence line community, just for context, is a community that is in close proximity to a facility, a hazardous facility that emits pollution, chemical facility, industrial facility, anything that has a has an impact on someone's life that is in close proximity. That's what we refer to as a fence line community. This slide here is just talking about racial zoning, and I think Atenas already covered most of this either way, but just wanted to highlight that in zoning, planners at our cities across the country um, have continued, right, and still continue to this date to perpetuate environmental racism. And environmental racism is essentially looking at land use decisions, the zoning of where people live, what locations, by your color, you're placed in a more dangerous situation or in harm's way. So really emphasize that one of the most critical pieces of why a lot of communities of color are facing a lot of daunting challenges is because of land use decisions being made. The practices, the policies, the programs that exist, like Atenas mentioned, through the homeowner own corporation. These are ideas, ideologies also framed even with local governments, cities, and councils, right? So for us, it's very important to not only think about the facilities, but also in the advocacy work that we do to ensure that communities moving forward can really so they can thrive. But we're also very instrumental in providing recommendations. For example, and we can get more into that in a little bit. In Armourdale, they were doing their comprehensive plan, and just to show you the level of what I mean, environmental racism that exists still within these government structures, is that every city and county and state, every city and county across the country needs to have a general plan, land use plan update every 5 years. It's such as like a policy that guides the city how they're going to move forward in the next, yeah, in the next 5 to 10 years. In Armourdale, they had not done one. They did it in 2021. They had not done one since 1979. So it just shows the level of disregard for human life, disregard for the people that live there. And a lot of the communities that live there don't even work in these polluting facilities, right? They don't even work in these facilities, as known by one of our colleagues at one of the another renewable some organization, yeah, Armourdale just says, a lot of our community doesn't even live here, but I mean, doesn't work in these same facilities that are killing them 22 years sooner, right? So to us, it has been very important to also be involved in that. So for us, general plans, land use, we are, we can't do everything. We're a small organization, because it does take work. It's a lot of work to be able to look at maps and data from the government, but we have been instrumental in providing that. So we did provide a 25-page environmental justice recommendation to that plan. That was 2020. So they have, within 5 years, they're going to move forward and implement some of the stuff they also put together. But we are still having those conversations. So we know that it's important for us not to just show up as protesters and, hey, shut this down, but also to have a seat at the table, that the community is part of that decision making process. Because we can do that. We do that as well. We can show up and protest, but we show up with the data and the research and have a seat at the table. So for us, it was really important. And the reason I wanted to highlight the zoning, and we also provided recommendations to KC climate plan, because in that plan, there was nothing there that addresses environmental injustice or inequities. It's just overarching. Even when it was adopted, they said, hey, there's no accountability to anyone. This is just a document that we're going to have in place. And so to us in the environmental justice movement, this is about self-determination. This is about people of color having a voice. And when people are making decisions for us, and when there's nothing there that's going to bring a direct benefit to those communities of color here and across the country, we have to step up and speak that, what, this plan is not good enough, because there's a lot of deficiencies. We're talking climate plan, and a lot of people can get around and say, oh, it's climate, it's the best plan ever. But if you read it, there's nothing there that's going to ensure a better life for anyone in the next few years or 10 years. And we live in a chemical disaster area at in the river, all the chemical facilities there. There's no mention there of a risk management plan. So there was a flooding here in 1951, I believe. Right, all this was underwater. The stockyards, Armourdale. We don't have a plan. We're thinking about climate change. It's not about if it's going to happen. It's just about like when it's going to happen again. And if we're not prepared for that, then our cities really, they don't really care about the community, right? They think more about their profits. And so it is important for us to ensure that we show up, but we're well informed, and we put a 40-page recommendation to the KCMO plan. And sometimes some of this is unfunded. Like, we don't have funding to go and write this and stay up late, and they do their research and look at their data that they're getting from the utilities, because the utilities are the drivers of a lot of these things as well. Are telling you, hey, do it this way, you got to do it that way. And so yeah, so just wanted to just highlight what we mean by the zoning and how that's a whole impact, because these general plans continue. I think they're working on another comprehensive plan now for all of Kansas City, Kansas. So again, we're going to try to get involved as much as we can. However, it's monumental work, right? Because it's addressing a lot of injustices.
And so when I start talking about environmental justice, I really want to highlight that we're standing on the shoulders of giants. So environmental justice didn't start with me, with even Beto. It started from generations of strong people, people of color who voiced their concerns and who had to advocate for themselves. It wasn't the EPA, it wasn't the government, right? So, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. All people have the right to participate effectively at every level of decision making, like Beto was saying. And this includes needs assessments, planning, implementation, enforcement, evaluation, and even the right to say no to any of these plans. So, why does this matter? And this is just going into a longer, basically detailed depth of what I was saying. But I really wanted to also highlight how, although we're fighting for environmental justice, we want what's best for the whole community. We're looking at this holistically, uh, from cradle to pipeline to till death. Because what that means is that whenever someone talks about, for example, net zero, we're talking about the for one, it's not indicating that it's zero emissions. It's basically false information. It's indicating that we're going to continue to extract, but at the end, at the pipeline, it's less toxic. Natural gas is not less toxic. And then at the initial part of how you're extracting that material to create such pollution and such gases, that is in itself affecting people's land, it's affecting people's water, and it's affecting their air. So we just want to make a strong stance that we don't support false solutions. Obviously, there's always new recommendations and new information being put out there. So we really try to take the time to research everything that maybe companies are trying to advocate for, or I've even seen at times when you're ordering something and they're like, "Oh, do you want to reduce your carbon footprint by making it net zero?" And they're going to plant a tree. Where are they planting the tree? And what trees did they have to chop down in order for you to have this shipped to you at a quicker pace? So it's just trying to think of it holistically, taking a step back and saying, maybe this isn't as green or as clean, and what population's being affected, right? We are not trying to get rid of a coal plant to then place another coal plant in a different community that is already having other facilities and toxic release inventory sites there. We want to eliminate that sort of source. We want to advocate for having actual solutions, which are right now at this point, we're saying we need to go zero emissions, which means from start to end, there is not going to be any air pollution and contamination in the air that we breathe, in the land that we are trying to grow our own food from, and in the water that we drink on a daily basis. We take that for granted sometimes, and we forget that some communities, even within Kansas City, do not have clean drinking water, who are being poisoned every day from it. So, why does this all matter? It all matters because it has to do with our health. And that's what environmental health encompasses, is that it addresses all of the physical, chemical, and biological factors external to a person. And this is something that we do. We walk day by day breathing without having to think about it, right? Luckily, our bodies are able to just do that for us. And since we don't think about it, we don't think, what are we breathing? How regularly are we breathing chemicals, whether that's in our households or while we're outside? And just because it doesn't smell doesn't mean it's not affecting you. So I did want to share just some highlights about some health related problems that we're seeing, especially like in the Armourdale community and in communities of color here in Kansas City. Asthma is a very predominant health concern that keeps happening more and more to our kids being diagnosed, or even they're not growing out of it, and it's going into their adulthood, right? Asthma can be prevented. I worked in a hospital where it's like they try to advocate for take your meds and you'll be fine. What if you're taking your meds, but you are literally right next to a site that's releasing air pollution, or you live right next to a highway where there's diesel trucks passing by all of the time? It doesn't matter how many times you take your meds, right? You're going to continue to have that irritation in your airway where it's going to be constantly inflamed. And a good reminder from that, or something that was highlighted during the COVID time, is that we noticed that communities that had chronic air pollution, so it's just constant, right? I'm thinking about Armourdale because if you go to that neighborhood, and I should have put a picture of them right there, it's literally on one side of it, it's covered in highway. The other side is railroad, and then they have all of these different like factories and also recycling sites where they crush metals. They use their streets, the residential streets that kids cross to get to their schools, as highways themselves, because there's not well made general plans that say, nope, you have to be rerouted, or no idling, or just simple things like that that you see in other communities. Um, they are one of the areas that got hit really hard with COVID. And what the research found, and this was actually published by the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, found association with chronic air pollution. So you're constantly breathing that right on the outside, with an 11% increase in mortality from COVID-19. And a 49% increase in COVID deaths in counties with elevated fine particulate matter, or fine particle pollution. When I say fine, it just we would get into so much. There's so many different sizes of particles, right? So when I say open your blinds and just smack it a little bit, you might see a little bit of dust. If you're a great cleaner, good job that you don't have any of that, but I still, I still get a little bit of dust accumulation. Those are the larger particles. Those are like PM10. PM 2.5, which there's different air monitors. EPA has a regulatory air monitor over on 10th and Nebraska, for example. In Kansas City, Kansas, they have one, and then in KC Mo, they have two. Those are the smaller air particles. So the smaller the particles are, the deeper they can get into our body, our circulatory system. And so the more small they are, the more dangerous they can be, right? So fine particulate matter is considered even smaller than a PM 2.5. So a PM 2.5 can make it into your lungs, your alveoli, which are these little bubbles inside of your lungs to help exchange oxygen. But the fine particulate matters, those are the ones that can make it into your bloodstream, which basically that's why we're seeing cardiovascular problems, we're seeing respiratory disease, because it spreads into other organs and can damage it. Now, sizes have nothing to do with what is the chemical compound. So we know the size, but we don't know what it's made out of, right? So that's why we're trying to do this work in determining how much is too much, right? And how much is a life valued at. But um, those people who were exposed to chronic air pollution on a regular basis, they were the ones that were more likely um, to be affected or hospitalized by COVID, and to have a higher mortality. So there is that problem that air pollution weakens your immune system. So whenever you get sick, you could get sick worse than other people. And I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to hand it over to Beto, and that way we can take turns.
So I was thinking about when she mentioned about the ultrafines, right? The ultrafines is not a, there's no standard. EPA does not have a standard for it. Much less, I mean, even if they have standards, there's no enforcement, so it's really inefficient, anyways. But what I did want to share, if you all have seen diesel trucks or that black smoke come out of diesel truck, it just leaves like a shade. You don't see little dots. You just see like gray. So that is an ultrafine because it's not a this your size, but that's the only time we can actually kind of like correlate what ultrafine is and visually, right? Because there's no standard for it. And this is what people are breathing in our communities, breathing particles that are much smaller, like Atenas mentioned, that get embedded into your bloodstream, that have there's known research, the environmental health hazards that exist, with over Sometimes it's over a lifetime. Sometimes it's within a few years. Everybody's different, right? Every person is different. It's just a matter of time when that symptom is going to appear. So for us, it's very important to look at also not just the size, but as I mentioned, the chemical composition of the particle, because it could be many. Because the PM2.5, like I said, it's size, but attached to it are different chemicals, different reactions, different particles, whether it's hexavalent chromium, or it's ethylene oxide, or it's black carbon from diesel emissions. Um, so it's to us, it's very important that we get to the root cause of this. And like again, I'm gonna go back to that slide where we talk about land use decisions. Like who makes decisions for us to put people of color in harm's way, right? And that is the places where there needs to be a lot of work done. Uh, there's still a lot of work to be done in these government and the government practices, policies and programs. Um, so yeah, I want to highlight a little bit about the cumulative impact. But wait, before I get there, so right now, with the PN 2.5, there is a standard. It's at 12 micrograms. Yeah, yeah, and standard over 24 hours. Now they want to lower it to 8 to 9. But even at the 12, EPA has not done enough to regulate this polluting industries or hold the polluters accountable or enforcement. What it means to the Clean Air Act. So the Clean Air Act is a law that it was enacted in 1970 by Nixon, who put this in place, and so they have been following this model of the Clean Air Act up until now. However, they just recently announced a new proposed standard. But if we can't even address the issues at a higher standard, we don't, we want it to go lower because then we can see what are the health benefits, cost saving and health benefits associated with that. However, it's still not good enough because they lack enforcement. They don't go and look at the facilities that are causing the harm. I mean, if you are a restaurant owner, they're going to come at you every day and tell you, hey, what are you doing? Uh, uh, but if you're an industrial polluter and you show up in a neighborhood, no one's telling you anything. You pollute, and the community that's there is breathing this stuff, right? And so there's a lot of examples of that. A community member says, when I moved, where he lives, big box company uh, came to his neighborhood, and they asked him if they told him, "Are you willing to move or relocate?" He said, "No, this is my house. I'm not going to move." And then another restaurant opened. Then once it opened up, another restaurant, he got a flyer. Hey, um, we're going to put this restaurant in this community. Are you okay with it? Do you have any concerns? But never got a notice about all the industrial facilities in his backyard. Never got a notice, say, this polluting facility, this chemical facility is going to be in your neighborhood. Never got a notice of that, right? So again, it shows disregard for communities of color, for human life, right? It's really thinking of those policies within government that we need to also disrupt and dismantle. Um, so that just leads me into this slide, and then I'll hand it over to Athena. So the cumulative impacts. And what we mean by that is that there is like I said, a lot of pollution, but then when EPA or other they don't take agencies don't take into account all the sources of pollution. They look at only one at a time. But in these same communities, they're breathing 10 different types of chemicals all day, all night, right? And we also know that at night, a lot of times is when they just emit more and these releases, we've seen it. And so we want to make sure that the cumulative impacts are also taken into account when we're thinking about any future land use decisions, any investments from the federal government that are now, saying 40% of federal funding should go to these communities. Is how do we look at this information and the data to understand that communities aren't just impacted from one source, but multiple things: socioeconomic factors, the soil underneath them, the air they're breathing, the water they're drinking. So it's looking into all of that. And so I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, it's just a more holistic approach because when you really think about it, there's hundreds of chemicals that can be released from polluting sources. And so instead of being like, okay, let's research one chemical at a time and see how that affects our bodies and how that affects our livelihood. Let's just look at it holistically. And then while we're looking at that holistically, what else is going on in that community that could be affecting their health? There's people who don't have access to healthcare. There's people who have limited access to like good education. There's people who have limited access to resources. Or even I'm thinking if you go into neighborhoods that have grocery stores and others that don't. They have more access to liquor stores or to tobacco or fast food, but not good, healthy like vegetables and fruit. So it's taking into account everything. We can't just keep being siloed into our little bubbles. We have to look at everything together. But I thought you were going to jump into this, but this is just we've oftentimes seen larger organizations start talking about like we don't want equality, right? I'm sure you've probably seen this image of what equality looks like. Everybody gets one box to be able to look over the fence, but equality doesn't help everyone, right? Or maybe you've seen the bike image where one bike doesn't fit everyone. I can't ride a kid's bike. So equity is about having the person who only has one box, but they're too short to see over the fence, or the fence is too tall for them. They're able to get the amount of boxes they need to be able to see. We're telling everyone, let's think past that. Let's go to what does justice look like? Why is there a fence in the first place? Why can't we just see all together the fence? Because ultimately, we want liberation. We want people to live in harmony. We want people to thrive. We want there to be that opportunity and not have these barriers in our way, if that makes any sense. So Bethel already mentioned quite a bit of things that we do at Clean Air Now, so we might be a little bit repetitive, but please give us perfect, the 5-minute warning. Clean Air Now goals. One is to build intergenerational community power and foster new leadership. Two is to develop and advocate for environmental health and environmental justice policies and regulations. Three is to identify investments for environmental justice communities to reduce burdens of environmental health hazards. Four, ensure accountability for environmental protection and enforcement. And five, establish a sustainable and accessible community led air monitoring network. So we won't have time to go into everything we've done, but Bethel's already mentioned quite a bit, right? We've done like a 40 page on the community for the climate action plan that Kansas City, Missouri put out. We've provided recommendations for the Armourdale General Plan. We're looking at energy equity because in Kansas City, we were speaking with community members and they are having bills way higher than I've ever experienced myself. So we're taking into account all of the different things that the community members are being affected by. We're fostering that intergenerational leadership and developing power mapping activities with the community to identify what are our assets and what are our threats, right? We think it's important that community need to be at the table. Community have been they're the experts in everything that they've been dealing with in their community. So I don't need some other consultant to come in and tell them what their neighborhood needs. Instead, they can just tell legislators this is what we need and these are the policies we want to see change. Did you want to talk real quick about this?
Yeah, before we get into this one, also, Atenas alluded to a little bit of the work that we do. Also, it's not just one thing, right? It's the energy burdens, for example, is that causes air pollution as well. And then those same communities are also being impacted, not just right from the dirty air pollution, but then paying that bill, right? Really high. And some of these same workers can work. Some of the same um, workers live in some of these communities, so there's no benefit to them at all, other than just being a dumping ground for these communities. So, and so our work is also it's very intersectional with housing justice issues, also intersectional with education in the classroom. And the reason I wanted to highlight the education piece, we talked a little bit about the predictor, the color, environmental racism and your skin color predicts, where you're going to live. It's pretty much that's some of the what we talked about. But education is also a big component because we also know that we continue to see that it's sometimes it's really hard for teachers that have never been in a have dealt with anxiety or necessarily not where they can't relate to the students when some of the students that show up to their classrooms um, are already struggling, right? They're hearing the parents at home. We can't pay the light bill. We can't. We're gonna get kicked out. They come with these stressors to the classroom, right? And when they come to the classroom, they're there, but if the teacher doesn't relate in the sense that they don't look like them, same color, or even they didn't grow up in substandard housing, are not going to understand these issues. So to us, it's also been very important to highlight these inequities in the education system, working with other educators around the area on both sides of the state line, because what we see is, again, when we talk about environmental racism, is all the disadvantages that are put on our communities of color, black and brown kids are put in harm's way. And there's many schools still that if you don't need necessarily need to like say, "Oh, where is it segregated?" But there's a lot of schools still in Kansas City, Kansas, where 90% are Hispanic, but where are the white kids? Or 90 it still continues. It's not as it's not out as out there because I think people will just forget that, we're moving forward in a way that we're progressing, but it still exists. And so to us, it's very important to highlight this inequity because I was I don't know, we're talking about air monitors there, but anyways, we were placing an air monitor near a school. Um, and while I was doing the monitor, I was up on the roof putting the monitor. I see something happening across the street, and there's a school, and you could see like a kid, the principal maybe, then the police officer shows up, the grandma shows up. I was watching all this unfold. And I'm like, whoa, this is a lot. This is a lot for a kid that's only what, 8 years old to have to deal all these things that are going on in their life. I mean, some of us are born, some people are born without any like there's sometimes not even a chance to make it, right? And seeing this, it really, Atenas was there with me. It was a hot day too. It was almost the summer. We're up in the roof putting a monitor, and it took me aback a minute. Not that it wasn't surprising, but just thinking about these same structures, right? Create these a community, a prison, right? Pipelines, right? Their kids continue in that when they are exposed to or telling the student, "Hey, if you don't behave, I'm going to call the police," and they show up. It puts something on them. It creates this stigma like, whoa, like every time. So they're going to shut down. And if they shut down at a young age, then we're done. And so to us, it's very important to look at that holistically because these are the same communities that we want to see thrive because they are the ones that have been left behind and continue to being left behind. So just wanted to cover that. So when we talk about Justice 40 initiative, this is this is not an environmental justice principle guided initiative. This is something that the government, the Biden administration, set forward in an executive order to tackle climate change here locally and abroad. Right? What does that even mean? Where we can't even tackle it locally, and he wants to go tackle it globally when we have a lot of issues here, right? Uh, but in this executive order said that 40% of all federal funding, whether it was the American Rescue Plan during COVID, there's still COVID, it's still happening. But and then the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, and then the Inflation Reduction Act. So all new federal funding, it's required at 40%. But also it's not a legislation. It's not like you have to do it. So there's that other thing, right? But he's saying 40% of that money should go to environmental justice communities. So we are also very involved in ensuring that this does happen. And yeah, that it happens. But those general plans that we talked about, those climate plans that we talked about, that we give recommendations are instrumental for our work to continue to have the seat at the table, to make sure that those investments do happen because a lot of these plans also look at federal funding. So we want to ensure that it does make it to the community. And while that's happening, that yeah, just make sure it makes it there. So and then I wanted to highlight that we are having this event called Justice Forward Toxic Tour. Okay. April 13th. This tour is going to bring legislators, community, at the table and take them on a tour around these facilities where they need to be investing, or the communities where they need streets, stormwater, new upgraded infrastructure. So we are very involved in that as well, those initiatives. And this is just a slide.
Yeah, just an additional call to action. If you're interested to learn more about Cleaner Now, when working with Beto, we always go a little bit over time, so I appreciate your patience. But follow us on social media. We're reamping our website too. So, I mean, while we're doing all of this work, website's also important, and so we're investing in that. So that will come soon. But if you're also interested to see how you can support a local community engagement effort that we're doing, it's on Saturday, April 22nd. We'll be celebrating Earth Day in Armourdale. We actually just booked the Armourdale Community Center. It'll be from 9 a.m. to about 1 p.m. We'll do a neighborhood cleanup, but we're also going to find that connection between health and how the environment impacts your health. So we're going to host a soil shop alongside other partners, such as Children's Mercy, and possibly the health department will be able to be there as well. To connect people with get your soil tested, find out if there's lead exposure, and then if we can also do a health screening. If those levels are high, we don't want to leave people hanging with like, all right, you have high lead or you have high blood pressure. What do you do now? We're going to make sure that they're also connected with, if they don't have primary care provider, a health navigator will be there. But thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting, and it was impressive that you focus also on having a seat at the table with these governmental proceedings. That's extremely important. We're going to have questions and answers in a moment, but first we'll have a little take up a collection for the support of the church. We will. We've got about 15 minutes for questions and answers, and remember that only ask your question, one question, until everybody else has had a chance to have their questions answered. So, Richard, are you ready to go?
Hi, thank you. How do we convince or frame the discussion to convince people that think injecting Lysol is a good solution for COVID, that reducing pollution is also in their best interest?
Was that a real question? Real question? Okay. um,
Yes, it was.
Thank you.
I added the joke in,
I
but
know.
what are some
Yeah.
ways we can talk about
Yeah,
that?
so I think I'm going to tie it into like the disinformation that exists, right? And I'm going to highlight it more to like what Atenas mentioned earlier about net zero, and how, we all learned in school zero is zero since we were kids, right? Just plain, it's not trying to be funny, but it is what it is. And now our polluters, our utilities, and our fossil fuel um, uh, companies are promoting this. They are the ones that have the solutions to the climate crisis now. They are the ones that caused it, and now they are the ones taunting that they have the solution. And now they're giving us these other issues like net zero, meaning that they're not willing to cut down to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. They're meaning that they're willing to continue to pollute and create these offsetting programs where you can invest here, and maybe in somewhere across the globe somebody will plant a tree for that money that you're paying over here. You'll see it everywhere, right? Carbon offsets. And how this relates also to the bigger context is that this is also part of the cap and trade, which is also putting a tax on carbon and trading that pollution to another company that has not yet polluted there. So it creates a mechanism of injustice, because the numbers that they're showing, for example, the KCMO plan, they showed the generating GHG numbers and putting it on buildings only and homes. That's the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases are buildings and homes. But wait, where are all these coal plants? Where's all these generating sectors that are causing this? Why aren't they highlighting that? So we also added a section there around how this information is not. There's no emission targets, no way how they're going to reduce their emissions. It's just saying, well, it sounds really nice. Net zero is a new thing, right? And everyone's like net zero. We're gonna get to like our homes, carbon neutral homes, right? And so to us, this is a form of disinformation to the same communities, because the same communities that are harmed now are the same ones that are going to continue to be harmed, because this pollution doesn't just disappear. They know how to target the same communities. And so when we talk about disinformation, like the question that was posed around, how do you tell? We really need to about injecting Lysol, the coming what you asked. This all this information, right? And what it is our capitalistic systems that know how to target our communities by saying, look, you plant a tree, you'll save a child, or you'll do this and you'll save somewhere else, but never focusing on the root cause of the issue. And so for us, it's very important that we, talk about this. And I can tell you, there's organizations that'll be there and we'll be at a place giving testimony or comments, and they stay silent. And they say, we're working on climate issues. We're working on these issues too. But they stay quiet. And I talk to them later, hey, why? How are we in alignment? And they're like, well, we care about the planet. But you did not advocate for communities' health. You didn't advocate, oh, well, we can't really push that hard because we get funding from the utilities. We get funding from Evergy and Spire and fossil fuels. So we cannot do more. And so I say, we're not in alignment. And that is where the thing is. The utilities and the cap have found a way to hold, power, even in a lot of organizations, right? So they know when to say that I'm done or I'm going to step in, but they just, us is really not going by that. We don't go by what's popular, because I can tell you that you might see a lot of climate change discussions, but none of them, not I don't want to say none of them, but most of them don't address the root cause. And when we talk about climate justice, there was a slide about climate justice. It's addressing the root cause of racism, not just the impacts of pollution. It's all associated with that. So hopefully that's a kind of answers your question. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, great presentation, and your organization sounds terrific. A question about the nuclear trigger plant that was operating in Kansas City in conjunction with the Cold War and the production of nuclear bombs and stuff. It's been the old one at 95th and Troost has been shut down. My understanding is that there is as nuclear weapons get modernized, new triggers are being put in, and that there is a new trigger plant in Kansas City about which I have little knowledge. Is it known how polluting that plant is going to be? And do we have any information about it?
Yeah, so I'm not too familiar. Are you asking they're proposing a new facility? It's already built. Okay, yeah. So one of the things with nuclear energy, where we also hold the stance against, is that it's not just the impacts of the pollution, because a lot of people think this is a cleaner source, but also the waste of the radioactive waste, and where it gets transported from those facilities, radioactive material to other communities. Again, same communities of color, right? So they take that pollution, the soil, and dump it there. And one of the things that's interesting, what you mentioned, is that they are using this nuclear energy now to think. I don't know if any of you have heard about um, carbon sequestration, carbon capturing of fossil fuels, and they can hold it. And all this is also something that we hold a line against, because we know it's going to continue to harm communities. But um, I'm not too familiar with the site, but I'm gonna take a look at it, because I just had a conversation last week about there's new development. There's KU wanting to look at some investments around green energy, hydrogen, which is going to be dependent on some nuclear. And we have a stance. We said we want to make sure that if we're going to do use uh, green hydrogen, that it comes from a clean source, whether it's solar or wind, and that's it. But there's no way they can guarantee it's not going to come from natural gas or nuclear. So we are involved in these conversations, and since I'm already doing my research on that, I'll look into that, and I'll get back to you on that, because these are the things that are important to us. Because what we've seen also, like KDHE, DNR, the cities, they don't announce like when there's a new facility or new permitting. And that's the other issue that we are working on too, is disrupting all of that, because we need that information. Because they said, well, we only share it if people ask. Well, how are people going to ask? But they don't even know what's happening if you're not letting them know, right? And so these are the issues that you can find some of that in our report. I think we highlight that in this report here, the environmental racism and the heartland. So hope that's something. Thank you.
A quick response. That new facilities in Richards Gebaur Air Force Base, a DOE facility. You might, so that save you some time to find it. When I reviewed the toxic release inventory in 1987, the first set, we were shocked to find that the majority of the pollutants coming out in Kansas City were actually solvents like xylene and toluene and many things like that. In many years since then, has that changed? Because we were thinking at first it was always smokestack facilities. Has that kind of data changed over the last 20, 30 years?
No. So, we continue to look at a lot of that information from. There's a database called the ECHO database the EPA has. So we look at their database, and then we do our own air monitoring. But I can tell you that those things are still happening. Those emissions, like Atenas mentioned too. You're not just because the smokestack, you don't see anything. It doesn't mean there's something there. Pollution can be invisible. But yeah, these things are still happening. Um, and in our report, in this the environment, we also highlighted 10 facilities that are known polluters. Just 10 of them well, there's more, right? And there is an enforcement inspection plan on behalf of the EPA to some of these facilities, but it's taking a long time, right? It's like it's always having to be on them about doing their job. But in short, yeah, we're still seeing the xylene, the toluene, yeah, and these are the ones that are really harmful because there's other chemicals attached to that.
And they're neurotoxins.
Neurotoxins, yes.
Okay. Lon Swearingen from YouTube has a question, and it's until one gets the global leaders to go and understand cooperation of every nation is necessary to address climate change. How do we get global leaders to essentially do just that?
Yeah. So, a lot of our solutions, community-led solutions, start at the local level, not at the global scale, because we know we can rely on our leaders, even here in our own cities, to do anything right. They run a good platform, but when they get elected, it's like they forget about what they promised the community, and then that goes to show how much of lack of education sometimes, that the same people that are voting are the people that are pretty wealthy. It is vote for them because this is you need to do your research, right? And when we talk about the global, it's a perfect example. I was just at the climate of the parties in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt in November. Global leaders from all over the country promoting technocratic solutions to the climate crisis. They're like, oh, let's do this. We're having a conference in a place where there's a lot of oil extraction. I mean, all the transportation that I was on was just killing me with pollution, right? And so we think about all these things, and why isn't that we continue to push our global leaders to have a space for our communities? They do these things, these events away from community. They don't want the community to be involved in those processes. And so it's monumental work, but I can tell you there's a lot of good organizations doing work in local communities. And it's monumental work, right? But I think the work starts on the ground in local neighborhoods for that. Like,
Great. We have just a couple minutes, but could you explain some about your monitoring system there in KCK and elsewhere? How many there are and roughly where they are in just a couple minutes?
Um, so we do have a community-led air monitoring system. So like I mentioned earlier, EPA has their one regulatory air monitor on the KCK side, right? And the location where it's at is not by all of the facilities or within the neighborhood that's being impacted. So lo and behold, is it really telling us what we need to know? No. So we have over 20 air monitors, and they're not just in KCK. We actually have the majority of them in the KCK area, which is like where we've been predominantly working with the community of Armourdale, Argentine, and Turner. But there's also other air monitors that we've been able to install for comparison reasons, and then also for any like opportunities, since we also have like a couple in Indian Mound. So that area is the neighborhood that's really close to the coal plant on the Kansas City, Missouri side. We have another one like in Lawrence or Johnson County or up north. And those can actually be found. That data and information is real time data. So it tells you right at that time, or if you want to look at the last hour or the last week, what the trends have been on the PM 2.5 level. So what we mentioned, 12 is what's currently standard for us to be breathing. And I was just telling Beto like a few days ago, we were noticing like it looks really hazy out. Let's check out our air monitors, and you can actually look at them. We're trying to build our own community website for this data, but right now you can pull up on Purple Air. That's the type of air monitor, the brand, and you can see all of them. So if they say CAN, that means that they're a Clean Air Now air monitor. But just a couple days ago, or a few days ago, it was very hazy. We pull it up and the levels were in the hundreds. And I'm like, so even again, like Beto was saying, even if standards are lowered, we're not even meeting the threshold for community members right now for the 12, right? So just trying to keep that in mind. And it's important because this is data that's owned by the community, and data helps drive change, right? It's just a tool. It's not environmental justice, but it's a tool for community members to advocate for their lived experiences because they can share their stories about how they've been impacted by air pollution, but it feels like it goes into crickets, right? Like no one's really listening until you're able to show like here's a supporting evidence, which is kind of frustrating, but at least it's theirs for them to own, and for we try to avoid like others to try to extract that data. So whenever people want to look at our data, we need to establish a trusting relationship with them. It's because that data belongs to the community and it's their choice what is done with it.
Great, thanks. That was very good. Now, they're going to be available for, I think, 20 minutes in the library here to have further discussion. And next week is church member Richard Thompson is going to talk about the extent that the news media, their role in the acceptance or rejection of LBGTQIA people, which will be very interesting. So hope to see you next week. So the library is just out the door and to the left. Right. Okay. Thank you. What I get to you really heroic work. You're very focused, you're very knowledgeable, and as far as I'm concerned, we're both heroes. Keep up the video. You know, I criticize a couple of my slides, if you can put them in there. Well, I don't know, I couldn't begin. No, just keep going on. Yeah, I need to talk about this. We're not gonna take a slide. I just want to, yes, I'm gonna make it very, very quick. Keep going. It's one ahead. It's clean air. Right. Keep going back. Keep going back. Keep going back. Keep going back.
First
keep
one.
going back. Keep going.
That's it.
No.
There's the first one.
No. Keep going. It's got a bunch of pictures on it. Right there. Go back. Go back.
This one.
Okay. Well, this may be one, but go back one more.
There's one that has a lot of photos. Let me show it.
You have from back there. The letters look this tall.
Oh, sorry.
Look at you. You've got a lot of things and little tiny letters.
Yeah.
Nobody can see it.